So welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, August 18th. My name is Heather Kraus, and I am the founder of a project called We All Count, which is a project for equity in data. And the very best part of my week is this thing we do on Fridays called Talking Data Equity. And that is what you are attending, whether this is your first time or whether you come every week. Welcome. We are extremely excited that you are here. Basically, Talking Data Equity is an informal Zoom gathering that is designed to help anybody who's trying to embed equity in their data work connect with other people that are working on the same tasks, compare resources, compare what is working for you, what isn't working for you, cross-pollinate ideas, and most importantly, remember that you're not alone. Every Friday afternoon, we pause and remember that we are not alone in trying to do this. Even if it feels like we are, even if it feels like we're not working, there is a lot of people in lots of sectors from all kinds of states and cities and different countries that are doing this. And today we have a very, very special guest that I will introduce in a second. But before I introduce, I'm going to do just a little bit of housekeeping logistics so you can know what to expect. We are recording this, and the reason we're recording this is because there's lots of people who want to learn along with us that can't attend live at this time. And so we put the recording in our Data Equity Community Forum, which is not a membership site. You don't have to pay money to belong. And we will also be posting all the resources that we talk about today. We'll be putting those there so that you can find them later. And I put the link to that in the chat. And you can also always find the link to that on the We All Count website, which is just weallcount.com. And how this works, we do this as a Zoom meeting so that you can all see and hear each other. Our special guest is going to present for a little while. They brought some slides and some stories. And while they're presenting, we ask that you use the Zoom chat to have as much conversation as you like. And then when they're done presenting, then we'll open it up to people unmuting and having a live conversation. So we do want you to stay on mute just for the beginning so that our special guest can share some stories and a couple of slides. And then we're going to ask you to raise your hands to come off mute, kind of one at a time so that we don't have 125 people all trying to talk at the same time. Okay. So having got the housekeeping out of the way, I am so excited to let you know that we have an extremely special guest who I've been a fan of for a long time, and they were willing to make an hour in their very busy schedule to come today. Dr. Kari Jordan, Kari L. Jordan, is a visionary leader and an advocate in data science education and community building. Dr. Jordan is the executive director of an organization called the Carpentries. So we've talked about the Carpentries a little bit here at Talking Data Equity, but some of you might be new to it. The Carpentries is a really, really cool thing. It's an internationally recognized organization dedicated to teaching researchers foundational coding and data science skills. So they are also like really concretely oriented. They're not just sitting around and spouting off ideas. They're doing really cool things. So as the executive director of the Carpentries, Dr. Jordan plays a pivotal role in shaping the landscape of data literacy and empowering individuals across the whole world. So we are really, really excited to welcome Dr. Jordan, and I will stop talking and make space here for Dr. Jordan. Thank you so much, Kari, for taking the time to spend with us in your busy life.
Listen, we are all busy. Okay, so I appreciate everyone for joining me today. Thank you so much, Heather, for inviting me. This is very important to me to have these conversations, because if I don't, things will stay the same, and that's not okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about equity and inclusion in the data revolution, and hopefully spark some ideas that you all can take back to wherever you're coming from, and hopefully some questions as well. Now, do I have the answers to every question? Probably not, but there are 132 people here. And so I really see this as a learning experience for all of us to learn what we all know and share what we all have learned. So let's get started. I won't talk for a really long time, I promise. So Heather mentioned, that I am the executive director of the Carpentries. I love that talking data equity is such a popular conversation series, and that you all are working to operationalize data equity. I'm coming from a community that prioritizes equity and inclusion, and I'm happy to share some of our experiences and some resources to help each of you embed equity in your data work. So the Carpentries is a nonprofit project that's fiscally sponsored by community initiatives. And our vision is to be the leading inclusive community teaching data and coding skills. And so our vision, in my opinion, would never be realized if we don't democratize the skills that we're building together as a community and as a broader data science community, whether you're coming from academia, industry, workforce development, nonprofit. Everyone needs data skills. And so what I want to do today is share some of the resources and the strategies that we've used in order to democratize data, in hopes that even if there's one thing that you can walk away being able to immediately apply, then I've done my job, and Heather will still want to be my friend after this. So we are in a data revolution. As stewards of this thing called data, this data equity framework, you all are creating data products, you're creating analyses and research, which is fantastic, but it must be equitable to achieve the greatest impact. Last month, I attended a meeting called Accelerating the Adoption of Open Science. It was a summit that was hosted by NASA and CERN in Geneva, Switzerland. And at this meeting, we collaboratively developed open science policies and action plans to establish open science as the norm. This closing statement from that meeting was so compelling that I really wanted to share it with you all. And I'm going to read it word for word because it really applies to the data equity conversation. It says, as key members of the research ecosystem, we aspire to advance discovery, promote responsible and ethical practices, foster a vibrant future within and across disciplines, train, support, and nurture current and future generations of researchers, and expand diversity, equity, inclusivity, and accessibility. To these ends, and acknowledging that there are differences across disciplines, geographies, and communities, we affirm our support for the open sharing of research, science, and scholarship as a key enabler of these core values. We commit to accelerating the transition to a more open, equitable, secure, and sustainable ecosystem. As data stewards and practitioners, all of us, we can advance equity in data, but we cannot do it unless we acknowledge the barriers, tear them down, and collaboratively build bridges to advance equity and inclusion. In order to address these barriers, we have to call them out. And it can be very uncomfortable to call things out, but we have to be comfortable with discomfort. So we're going to talk plainly about some of the impediments that people of color, women, underrepresented groups have in data that prevent our full participation and representation. And these barriers can be structural, cultural, and even individual. First is access to education and training. Socioeconomic disparities can limit access to quality education and training opportunities that are necessary for entering data science careers. We all know that schools in underrepresented, underprivileged communities need more resources. They need experienced teachers and access to advanced coursework in STEM. The second is unconscious bias. Bias, both explicit and implicit, can affect hiring practices. And if you resonate with any of these, I want you to go ahead and put it in the chat. Share your story in the chat if you feel comfortable. So these biases can affect hiring practices, promotion opportunities, and career advancement. Unconscious bias may result in excluding people of color and women from projects, leadership positions, and even in hindering their professional growth. The third is inclusive workplace culture. Data science workplaces if they lack diversity and inclusivity, or even cultural sensitivity for that matter, that can make people of color feel unwelcome and marginalized. A lack of diversity and leadership, and especially in decision-making roles, can perpetuate this problem. Mentorship and networking. Limited access to mentors and professional networks can also hinder career growth. So are there opportunities to be part of professional organizations where you can learn from mentors or have a sponsor, for example? Building connections within the field is essential for accessing opportunities, job openings, and even research collaborations. Stereotyping and microaggressions. This is something that I experienced all throughout undergrad, all throughout graduate school. People of color face stereotypes about their technical abilities or even microaggressions that lead to lower self-confidence and job satisfaction. I remember the first day, before I began my journey as a nonprofit executive, I was in a faculty role. And I remember the first day of classes and the students not believing that I was the professor. It was very odd and ridiculous. You know what I mean? So again, stereotyping. Whose job is it to be in a particular role? And where do these stereotypes and these microaggressions even come from? And how can we challenge them? Lack of role models. The absence of visible role models who look like them can make it challenging for people of color to really envision themselves succeeding in the field, which affects their aspirations and their motivation. So we're talking about data science, right? If you Google the term data scientist, what images appear? Don't do it. You'll be frustrated. Cultural and linguistic barriers. Cultural differences and language barriers may create challenges in communicating and collaborating, particularly in multinational or diverse teams. The Carpentries is a global organization. We run workshops in 64 countries on all 7 continents. And we're able to do that because we know English may be a common language that many speak, but it's not the only language in the world. And so we have to create resources that promote internationalization of the skills that we teach. Implicit requirements. Some job descriptions may have implicit requirements that favor candidates from specific backgrounds that lead to unintentional exclusion of people of color in data science fields. So these are just a few barriers. I don't want to depress us, so we're going to talk about solutions. But if any of these resonate with you, I want you to go ahead and share your story or share anything that resonates with you in the chat. And I'll pause for a quick second while I get something to drink. So we can address these barriers. We're here. It sounds like you all have this chat every Friday. I hope that I can come to many more of these chats and work through these conversations with you. I will share the materials from the Accelerating the Adoption of Open Science. Can I share that with you, Heather? Is there a recap that goes on? Okay, I'll share those materials for you all. So addressing these barriers requires a concerted effort from individuals, organizations, policymakers. If you're a policymaker here, I would love to know that. These strategies, there are many, many strategies that can promote diversity and inclusion in data. Some of them are implementing proactive diversity and inclusion policies in recruitment and promotion, providing scholarships, internships, and mentorship programs to underrepresented groups, offering unconscious bias training to mitigate the impact of bias on decision-making, creating safe spaces for open discussions about diversity and inclusion. That can be very scary, especially if you don't feel you are a quote unquote expert. But one thing I can say about that is we're all experts at something and we all have an experience. And so bringing your experiences into the conversation and leaving room for a growth mindset is what is needed to address these problems. Encouraging data science education and engagement in underserved communities. One thing that I love about data science is that you can use it to solve problems that are important to you. That may mean something very different from someone coming from a tribal college, for example, or someone like me who's originally from Detroit. I want to learn data science so that I can figure out how to better work with people in my local community. So everyone comes from a different background. Learning data science can help you solve problems that are important to you or the community that you come from. Promoting role models and success stories of people of color in data science to inspire the next generation. There are so many people doing the work, and I have a slide where I'll share some of my favorite organizations to follow. And then recognizing and actively working to dismantle these barriers. The data science community can become more inclusive, diverse, and representative of society. It makes no sense for society to be so diverse, but individuals in the data science field all look the same. Whoops, there we go. So we can only solve some of these problems, but we do it by recognizing our individual zones of genius. So I mentioned earlier, we all have a story. My story is that I'm a product of the Detroit public school system. I tested well into a high school that focused on science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I went to a predominantly white institution. I did my PhD at The Ohio State University. But despite all of that, I still felt like an imposter by the time I got into the workforce because I saw nobody who looked like me. We all have a story. So my zone of genius is being able to talk about my experiences growing up in the city and navigating all of these different microaggressions in order to be where I am today. What is your zone of genius, and how can you use your story to share with someone and inspire them to get into this data science field? Because despite when I was doing my undergrad, I didn't want to learn how to code. But now I see we all need to learn how to analyze data at some point. So it's important for us to share our stories. What can this group of professionals do? Your mission involves working together to meet data challenges. We're having these conversations because we think data is important, right? What can you do specifically? And then who around you is interested in solving problems or interested in having these conversations and putting what we're talking about into action? I think you're well positioned to move many recommendations forward. I have a couple that I'll share with you, and then I see the chat is blowing up, so I want to see what we're talking about and answer some questions. So the first one is to continuously look for ways to make it easier for newcomers to join this conversation. I love that there's 143 people here. It has been a long time since I've been on a Zoom call where there were 100 plus people. Did you invite someone to this conversation? Are you holding all of this awesome conversation to yourself and not telling anyone about it, right? Invite newcomers and make it easy for them to contribute. I would also recommend that we focus on being responsive to the needs that are identified by this community, particularly those long-running problems that are frustrating or blockers, especially since AI and machine learning, you know, it's the buzzword. Everybody wants to jump into AI. You can't jump into AI if you don't know the fundamentals of working with data. You can't jump straight into machine learning. So what are the long-standing issues and problems that you can work on as a group that will then propel you forward to be responsive to the needs in your community using data science skills? Always consider whether our decisions reflect inflexibility and strive to be more flexible and inclusive. Again, we can't fix all the problems at once, but how are your decisions, again, we're talking data equity. So if you're a decision maker, a policy maker, how can you be more flexible in your decisions, whether it's with hiring, whether it's with training, in order to be more inclusive? Commit to creating support structures and transparency. I can already tell that this community is great at welcoming new people. I feel at home. Since the first email Heather sent me, it was just full of excitement. I know that I'm welcome here. How can you continue in transparency with what you're doing in order to bring more people of color and women into data? And once they're there, one of my favorite quotes is by Verna Myers. And she says that diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. So don't just invite me to the party and then make me stand on the wall and not be a part of it, right? Once we've invited all of these people to have these conversations, but how are we including them? That's why I keep asking you, put it in the chat, share your story. It's not enough to have diverse people in the room. I want to feel included. I want to feel like I can contribute and that my contributions are valued. And then lastly, when you know better, do better. It's a simple statement that my grandmother used to say. When you know better, do better. If you learn something that makes it easier to include more people in a conversation that don't look like you, do it better next time. If you learn something, if you put on a data science workshop, or if you are collaborating on a data project with someone and you learn that the approach that you were using wasn't inclusive or it wasn't accessible, do it better the next time. Have a growth mindset. And in doing these things, we all can achieve equity in data science. So those are the things I wanted to share with you today, and I will make sure that my slides are available. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I want to hear some thoughts, reactions, and take any questions that you have. So Heather, I'll pass it over to you to facilitate this part.
Yep. Awesome. Thank you so much, Kari. I really, really appreciate it. And you all can now see why we were so excited to have Dr. Jordan visiting with us today. And so I will go through the questions in the chat, but if you're in the room live and want to raise your hand and either share an experience, ask a question, please just raise your hand using the Zoom chat. And if you don't know how to raise your hand in Zoom, usually it's a little bit depends on your setting, but probably there's like a smiley face with a plus on their head. And if you push that, then that'll put your hand up and we will unmute you in the order that you raise your hand. And we highly encourage you to raise your hand even if you don't have a fully formed question or experience to share.
I'll share one answer to a question that I see one question in the chat already. Building a strong foundation is so important. I'm curious to know what are some trainings you all recommend for anyone starting out. So I put a link to the Carpentries, a page that lists out some of the curricula that we teach at the Carpentries. All of our material is open source, which means it's available online for you to self-pace through at any time if you can't make it to, if you don't find a workshop that's in your area or online. But if someone, I would recommend someone who's getting started with data to learn the fundamentals of working with data, meaning spreadsheets. Start with how to format data in a spreadsheet. If you Google that, or we also have a spreadsheet lesson at the Carpentries. If you self-pace through it, I think it's maybe 90 minutes. It shows you how to format your data in a spreadsheet so that when you load it into a program like R or Python, it's easier to analyze and interpret that data. So having that foundation will make your life so much easier moving forward. So that's, if you are starting from scratch, learning how to format and clean your data so that a program like R or Python knows what to do with it, that's where I would start.
I really want to second everything that Kari is saying. We get this question a lot in Talking Data Equity. It's one of the reasons that we brought to Dr. Jordan today. We get a lot of questions of where to start, and so many of the things that kind of say they're for beginners and really are trying to be for beginners start at a really advanced level because they're not really good at understanding what it's like to be a beginner. And then the Carpentries, you can tell from the name, Data Carpentries, that they really mean like get your hands on some tools and do some work. And I have a long history of experience with different trainers and courses, and the Data Carpentries are fabulous. And if you can't find exactly what you need, really want to echo everything that Dr. Jordan is saying. There's so much open source materials. We can talk about how we might incorporate maybe group learning into this Talking Data Equity experience, because we know there's a really strong demand. So it's one of the reasons that we asked Kari to share some time. Kari, there's a question that got direct message to me anonymously that I'm going to ask. It's because it's a really interesting one. Throughout your career, what red flags or green flags have you looked for when deciding whether to accept a job or an opportunity? I ask this because I've been going through a hiring process for a data science job with the US federal government. We all roll our eyes. For the last 4 months, that has included coding exercises, subject matter interviews, etc. Yet I am getting questions from hiring managers that make me think they have doubts about my skills. That's a great question. I'm looking forward to your answer.
As a hiring manager and as someone who has had to look for new roles, I'll speak very briefly to both. When I decide I want to apply for a role, before I even sign up for any newsletters or look anywhere, I write down the things. I don't write down the name of the role or the title. I write down the things that are important to me and that I want to be able to do and the impact that I want to make. So for example, how I came to the Carpentries, I was finishing up a postdoc in the engineering fundamentals department. And I wanted a role where I could still teach, I could do research, but I could make direct impact on communities of color. So I didn't write down, I want to be the deputy director of whatever. I wrote down, I want to be able to do these things and I want to work from home, right? So, and then from there, I looked for roles that spoke to those parameters. And it just so happened that this role, the role that I was in 6 years ago, is the one that stumbled upon me, right? Transparency in the job description is super important. So they told me up front what the salary was and the benefits and the team that I would be working with and the kind of projects that I would be working on. From a hiring manager perspective, it's important to me. Time is very important, and I try not to ask more of potential candidates than I really need, because I find that in some instances, going through an interview process, they're extracting information and knowledge from you that they could just use and not even hire you, right? And so you'll never know you'll never know unless you ask directly. Have I provided you with the answers to your questions? If you're submitting code and things like that, it's important, but as a hiring manager, we try not to create assignments that would take more than 30 minutes, because again, it takes a lot of time. If you're a job seeker, you're applying for tons of jobs. It's a lot of demand on you. And so we try not to, if it takes more than 30, we say, please, if this should not take more than 30 minutes, for you to complete this task, because we know that your time is valuable. So I hope those are some things that you can consider. I would ask directly, and also think from your own perspective in looking at the role, is this company in line with my personal values? Is the role in line with the things that are important to me? And then someone shared in the chat, or companies can pay you to do the assignments. Exactly. Yes. I have seen that a lot too. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's coming up more and more also for people who work in like data viz and graphic design. There's a long history of those kind of jobs being expected to produce work for free, which is luckily, or not luckily, but thankfully falling out of favor. And as people are figuring out that that's very, very bad for equity and diversity and justice. Yeah. Okay, so many other great questions. One of them that's coming up a couple of times is, do you have an opinion on kind of STEM or data companies that hire based on competency rather than on formal credentials? Like, do you think that that's good for equity or bad for equity? Because it might, if you're, oh, good.
I definitely do have an opinion about that. And again, this is coming from someone, I have a terminal degree, right? So I know the value of going through that process. There are pros and cons. We can have another conversation where we're not recording, and we can talk more about the pros and cons of having a terminal degree. But having a terminal degree doesn't mean you can do the thing. And so when I'm hiring in the required or preferred, list we list out competencies, and we will say, we want to know not only, program management or, those types of things, but we would say master's level degree or relevant experience. If you can prove that you have experience in doing X thing, I take that over you went to school for a number of years, because it's no guarantee that you can actually do the work. So I agree 100% that it's much more equitable. When we've opened up the applications that we would probably never see because they didn't have a master's or a PhD, we would have never found some of the candidates. And so I do don't get me wrong, obviously, again, I have a terminal degree, so I know I see the value and understand the value of going through, schooling, but we also know that science is changing, data is changing every single day. So there are and a lot of data science programs are just now popping up. Universities are just now offering a master's in data science.
Yeah.
And so you have to get those skills from somewhere. And a lot of data scientists, they learn the skills by being a part of open source communities and open source projects. It's not that they got a master's, it's that they volunteered for, the Algorithmic Justice League pro bono, and they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart. So I definitely think that expanding it and just making sure, if you can prove that you can do it, it's okay if you don't have the degree, the letters behind your name, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's really good. Thanks for calling out the Algorithmic Justice League. Fantastic opportunity of demonstrating this stuff. Also Data for Black Lives, a kind of associated organization of fabulous examples in terms of, amplifying role models, doing amazing work, having great conferences, and also selling great merch if you want to support them financially. The merch there is fantastic. And also somebody mentioned in the chat that they became a data analyst by doing ground level advocacy in the HIV/AIDS movement. And that's really true about health, how data was used in health had some breakthroughs due to the very, very bad behavior of governments around the AIDS crisis that forced technically trained people to get very good at data. So I think it is important. I'm going to ask another question on that topic of health that's in the chat that kind of circles back to Kari, what you were talking about at the beginning, which is if you have health data, it's a very long question, so I'm just going to kind of summarize it. They're talking about the open science that you started off with, and they work in public health, and they're working for a local public health, one down, it looks like, from state. So have you had any experience? Do you have any suggestions about how to do kind of open public health work when so much of the data can't be shared? Definitely can't be shared on an individual level, and can't even sometimes be shared on a neighborhood level because it's now so easy to find people.
Yes, I think from a policy perspective, we have to start with the end in mind. What is the goal of sharing out this data? Is it for transparency's sake, to allow the communities to understand what's going on in the community, and using the data to provide resources or educate the community on nutrition, or educate the community on ways that we can improve our health? Or is it to ensure that researchers who already get tons of grants from the NSF or NIH or any of these other funding agencies, to make sure that so that they can take the data, do a research product that nobody can see unless you can pay for the journal, and then just continue to perpetuate that, right? There are ways that you can de-identify, you can take out, unique identifiers from the data and share aggregate information, but that takes trust. We haven't talked a lot about ethics today, and I'm sure that there's probably already been conversations about data ethics and things like that, and maybe there will be in the future, but we have to start there. We have to start with ethics, with understanding informed consent, with talking to individuals about the data that they're, offering about themselves. And if we are able to educate communities on data ethics and things like that, then I think we can have more open repositories, take away the the identifiers and share more aggregate information and help the communities learn how to use that information for decision making. You know, it's funny, I was driving yesterday in this neighborhood where I used to live, and I hadn't been there in a while, and there were 7 new urgent care facilities. And I thought to myself, why do we keep opening more urgent cares? Why don't we open a nutritionist building and a yoga studio and a mental health, so again, data is used for decision making. And I think if we have more conversation around data ethics and those types of things, people will be more apt to want to share their information. But I don't trust people. What are you doing with this data?
Yeah, I think that that's such a good point, that it really involves considering data to be a relationship thing. It's not the difference between data as a resource you extract and data as a resource that exists and we can co-create with. Even so many well-intentioned organizations that maybe are trying to do good things with their data, they forget to do that very thing you're talking about, which is tell the people whose data they use what they did with the data. And go ahead.
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I also think that those conversations are had on the back end instead of being a part of the conversation up front, especially when you're thinking about, projects that are grant funded and things like that. It's at the end when it's time to write the report. It's like, okay, so what do we do for data equity? No.
Exactly.
And it takes a long time to build relationships. I'm working now with a couple of historically Black colleges and universities. And we're also working really closely with some tribal colleges on, upskilling them in data skills. It takes years to build trust. You're not just going to come in and do a study and produce a report in 3 months. It takes years, and that kind of dedication, it takes time to build those relationships before they'll open up and want to share that information with you.
Yeah. Thank you for raising the time issue, because I know a few people have raised it in the chat. And I just want to emphasize, we have about 5 minutes left. So if you are in the room and you want to unmute yourself, go ahead and raise your hand, and then we'll unmute you. We would love to hear your question and or comment. And so much when we're talking about data equity comes down to the time. Well, we don't have the time, or our funder won't give us the time, or whoever won't give us the time. And there's even when I'm talking to wealthy organizations that are independent and make their own decisions, and they're like, but the cultural problems are so bad that we have to heal them, they don't say that, solve them quickly with data. And there's this belief that as long as we go fast with data, we're gonna get there. And it's really the opposite, right? As long as if we could slow down and build trust. So much what I want to amplify what Dennis is saying in the chat about trust building, and that the lack of trust isn't just something that happened. It's, it's justified. There's a good reason that there's not trust, and demonstrating continually that this data project may actually learn how to put its actions where its priorities are, and use data in a non-extractive way, use data in a non-oppressive way. And there's no way to build trust other than to slowly demonstrate that we're learning how to do that. And that isn't going to be some fast machine learning thing, just like what you're saying.
Absolutely. I want to answer Catherine's question. Catherine works for an agency that prides itself in being data-driven, and the data department sort of holds itself in their ivory tower. And they've been struggling to have these discussions about how to use our data work to pursue our equity commitment? What would you recommend to help build bridges and have them come to the table and work with us lay people? First of all, you're not a lay person, Catherine, okay? Secondly, I know that there is a champion in that ivory tower. There's always one. You have to find who that champion is. And sometimes there was a couple more comments in the chat talking about like different buzzwords. I find that when individuals who live in the ivory tower see a compelling story, they're gripped to move. Unfortunately, over the last couple of years, it's been, you know, racial unrest and all of these other things that, the pandemic forced us to sit and look at it. And so there were a lot of movements in terms of, equity and inclusion and all of that. For some people, unfortunately, that's the case. You have to find who that champion is. It could be one person that agrees with what the conversation that we're having today. But once you find that one champion, they will fight for you. And so that would be my recommendation. You can start by inviting them to this conversation, or even sending the recap, sending a video, sending a quick email with like 3 bullets, maybe linking out to an article. But again, for some people, they're not going to take the time to dig around for the information themselves. But if they get an email that says, this paragraph in this article might be interesting to you, sometimes you got to do all the work for them in order to find who that champion is and get them interested. And then I think it will make it easier to build that bridge if you have a champion. And yes, it's a process. There's no, and it's not one size fits all. What works for the South US is not going to work for the West Coast, right? The US, and again, we're talking US right now. I work for a global organization. So imagine there's no one size fits all approach, but we have to start somewhere and be okay with iterating and learning as we go. Yeah. Drop the issues every now and then. my every now and then is every day.
All right. Awesome. I know that we could talk about this for many, many more hours, and you can see why I was so excited to have Kari join us. But we do have to leave it here to make sure that everybody has 5 minutes before those of you who have back-to-back meetings. We want to make sure that we do a human thing and don't go right to the top of the hour. So as always, we will put this video and links to a number of the resources that Dr. Jordan shared with us in the free, publicly accessible Data Equity Community Forum. And you can, as Dr. Jordan recommended, maybe send it to somebody that you would like to be the champion in your organization and say, you can watch 5 minutes of this. And most of all, we want to say huge thank you to Dr. Jordan for being so generous, spending an hour with us, putting together these slides beforehand and thinking, learning about our community and being willing to come and be part of the family. Very, very, very grateful that you were willing to do that. And to all of you who keep coming back and joining a collective group that is trying to move the needle in a real concrete way. I think each Friday we do move the needle a tiny, tiny bit and plant seeds that are going to grow into big, equitable trees. We are back next Friday. Next Friday, we are talking about disability justice and data. So we'd love to have you for that. And if you're going to be on vacation or out, you can follow up with the recording. So take good care of yourselves, take good care of each other. And Kari, thank you so, so much. Really appreciate it. I'll be back.
I'll be back.
Awesome. All right. Okay. Bye, everybody. See you soon.